The air in the house had grown thin, stripped of the scent of pine shavings and linseed oil that had been her grandfather's atmosphere. Alara, at 24, felt the change not as a sudden event, but as a slow, creeping chill that had started the day her uncle arrived with his leather briefcase and his scent of stale paper. The house had been her grandfather's masterpiece, a testament to board and beam, built with his own hands on a plot of land, overlooking the rail yard where he had spent 40 years as a surveyor and master engineer. For Alara, it was the only world she had ever truly known. He had been both father and mother to her, a fortress of love and competence who had passed not into memory, but into the very grain of her being. He had taught her the world through her hands. While other girls learned sums in a classroom, Alara learned to read the fine gradations on a vernier scale. She learned the solemn weight of a plumb bob finding true vertical, the satisfying rasp of a dovetail saw cutting a clean joint, the cool, unwavering truth of her grandfather's brass transit compass. He would let her hold it, its polished casing heavy in her small palms. "Gravity and magnetism, Ellie," he would say, his voice a low rumble. "They don't lie. You find true north and you find true down, and you can build a world from there." That compass, now tucked in the pocket of her worn canvas jacket, was her only remaining piece of him, a solid, tangible piece of his soul. The end came not with a shout, but with the quiet rustle of legal documents on the oak dining table he had built. Her uncle, a man whose hands were pale and uncalloused, looked at her not with malice, but with the flat, indifferent gaze of an administrator closing an account. He had inherited the house, a fact of law that felt like a violation of nature. "The property is sold, Alara," he said, his words precise and devoid of comfort. "The new owners take possession on the 1st of the month. That's in 3 days." He pushed a check across the polished wood surface. "I've liquidated your grandfather's accounts. After settling his final affairs, this is what remains. Consider it a final settlement." She looked at the check. $500, a life's work, a universe of knowledge and love, reduced to an insulting, sterile number. She did not cry. She did not plead. The grief was too deep for that, a solid mass of ice in her chest. Her grandfather had taught her resilience, the quiet dignity of facing the inevitable. You did not argue with a landslide. You found solid ground and you moved on. She picked up the check, folded it once, and put it in her pocket beside the compass. "I'll be gone by morning," she said, her voice even. Her uncle gave a curt nod, a man relieved of an unpleasant duty. He saw a penniless niece, an obstacle removed. He did not see the legacy living and breathing inside her, the wealth of skill and knowledge that could not be liquidated or sold. She packed a single canvas satchel. It was not a flight of panic, but a methodical selection of necessities. Her grandfather's hand-forged chisels, wrapped in an oilcloth roll. A small block plane, its steel blade honed to a razor's edge. A spool of waxed linen thread and a set of sailmaker's needles. A whetstone. A change of clothes. Her worn leather gloves. And a small, dense supply of dried meat and hardtack. Lastly, she tucked the brass transit compass into a side pocket, its weight a familiar reassurance. She walked out of the house as the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky, and she did not look back. She journeyed west, a ghost on the arteries of commerce. She rode in the rattling boxcars of freight trains, the smell of diesel and hot metal, a strange counterpoint to the clean mountain air that began to filter through the open doors. She followed the old rail lines, the ones her grandfather had spoken of, iron veins he had helped lay through impossible terrain. The journey was a blur of motion and solitude, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels, a metronome marking her slow departure from one life and her uncertain approach to another. Days bled into one another. She conserved her meager funds, eating the food she had packed, refilling her canteen at depot spigots. She was an island of quiet purpose in a sea of indifferent motion. In a dusty town nestled in a high mountain valley, a place called Providence, her money was running low. She sat in the corner of a diner, nursing a cup of coffee, the $500, now broken into smaller bills, feeling thinner than ever in her pocket. At the counter, two men in dusty ranchers' clothes were laughing. "Heard the county's finally given up on the old Blackwood Depot," one said, spearing a piece of bacon. "Putting it up for tax auction. $450 for that pile of rocks." The other man snorted. "You'd have to be a fool to pay $400 for a ghost. They say Silas Blackwood's spirit still walks that sealed tunnel. Fresh tracks in the snow every winter, they say, leading right into the stone wall." "It's a folly," the first man agreed. "Always has been. Cursed from the start." Alara listened, her focus sharpening. Depot, tunnel, stone. The words resonated with the language her grandfather had taught her. A place considered worthless, haunted. A place no one else wanted. A flicker of something, not hope, but a grim, practical resolve, ignited within her. The county clerk's office was a small, dim room smelling of old paper and floor wax. The clerk, a man with a nameplate that read Mr. Abernathy, looked over his spectacles at her with an air of tired amusement. "Can I help you, miss?" "I'm here about the Blackwood Depot property," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'd like to purchase it." Mr. Abernathy blinked, then a slow smile spread across his face. "The Blackwood Folly? You're serious?" He leaned back in his chair, treating it as the joke of the day. "It's a ruin, you know. 10 miles up the old spur line. Barely a trail to get there now. The tunnel's been sealed for a century. Place is condemned." "I understand," Alara said. "The price is $450? "That's the price for the back taxes," he chuckled, pulling a thick, dusty file from a cabinet. "Deed and title, as is. No warranties, no refunds, and no help with the ghosts." He filled out the paperwork with a flourish, the scratching of his pen the only sound in the room. She counted out the worn bills onto the counter. He took the money, his fingers brushing over it as if it were play currency. He stamped the deed with a heavy, final thud. "There you are, miss," he said, sliding the document across the counter. "Congratulations. You are now the proud owner of the most worthless piece of real estate in this county." He was still smiling as she turned and walked out, the deed clutched in her hand. It felt heavier than the money had. It felt like an anchor. The hike was arduous. The old spur line was more memory than trail, a faint depression in the earth, choked with aspen and pine. She followed the ghost of the railbed, her grandfather's lessons in terrain and topography guiding her steps. After nearly 5 hours of climbing, she saw it. The depot was skeletal. It stood in a small, high meadow, a 2-story structure of massive, rough-hewn granite blocks and heavy timbers. The roof of the main hall had collapsed entirely, leaving a ribcage of blackened rafters open to the sky. Windows were vacant eyes, their glass long shattered. But it was the tunnel that seized her attention. Just beyond the depot, a perfect Romanesque arch was cut into the sheer face of the mountain. It was sealed. A wall of enormous, carefully fitted stones, mortared and braced with thick, iron-strapped timbers, blocked the entrance completely. A faded, rust-streaked sign was bolted to the rock. Condemned. Blackwood Tunnel, 1888. The site was profoundly desolate, a monumental tomb for a dead enterprise. For a moment, a wave of despair washed over her. Mr. Abernathy's mocking laughter echoed in her ears. What had she done? But the chill of the encroaching evening spurred her to action. Despair was a luxury she could not afford. She circled the ruin, her eyes assessing, calculating. The main waiting hall was a lost cause, but a smaller, single-story wing attached to it, the old station master's office, looked more promising. The slate roof was sagging and punctured in places, but the main ridge beam seemed to hold. The walls were the same solid granite, 2 feet thick. This would be her shelter. She forced the heavy oak door, its iron hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the air was thick with the dust of a century. Pack-rat nests and a carpet of dried leaves covered the floor. But the floor itself was solid oak planking, and in the center of the far wall stood a magnificent stone hearth, large enough to stand in. It was a fortress in miniature. The work began. It was the only thing she knew. She did not think about her loss, or her loneliness, or the enormity of the task ahead. She focused on the immediate. She used a broken piece of slate as a dustpan and a pine bough as a broom, sweeping the floor clean. The methodical, rhythmic motion was calming, a prayer of action. As she cleared the debris, the bones of the room revealed themselves, good bones. The oak floor, beneath the filth, was silvered with age but not rotted. The plaster on the walls was crumbling, but the lath beneath was sound. Her work took her to the hearth. It was a masterpiece of masonry, built from the same gray granite as the depot walls. As she cleared away the last of the debris from the mantelpiece, a single massive slab of stone, her fingers traced the joints of the blocks above it. Her grandfather had taught her to read stone as others read books. And here she found a strange sentence. One of the blocks, a large, almost square piece just to the right of the central keystone, was different. The granite was the same color, but its surface was dressed with a finer tool. The chisel marks were shallower, more precise, and while the other stones were stained with a century of soot, this one was clean, as if it had been set in place long after the last fire had died. She ran a fingernail along the mortar line. The surrounding mortar was old, crumbling lime putty, but the mortar around this specific block was different, harder, grittier. It was a Portland cement mix, a material that would have been rare and expensive, but not impossible in the late 1880s, especially for an engineer. A subtle, almost invisible anomaly. Her heart began to beat a little faster. It was a whisper from the past, a detail that didn't belong. She remembered the stories of the sealed tunnel, the ghost tracks, the folly. But this was no ghost. This was a deliberate act. This was a secret. The next morning, she retrieved her grandfather's tool roll. She selected a 1-pound rock hammer and a fine-tipped star chisel. The work was delicate. She didn't want to shatter the stone, only to remove it. She tapped gently at the hard mortar line, her blows precise and patient. For hours, the only sound was the metallic tink, tink, tink of the chisel against the cement, a counterpoint to the sigh of the wind through the broken rafters of the main hall. The mortar resisted, but she was relentless. It was a conversation with the past, a dialogue of force and material. Finally, with a low grinding sound, the chisel broke through. She worked her way around the stone, chipping away the seal. Using a small pry bar she had found in the debris, she carefully worked it into the crack and levered. The stone, weighing at least 100 pounds, scraped inward, then tilted. It fell into the dark cavity behind it, with a heavy, muffled thud that echoed in the sudden silence. A wave of cool, dry, utterly still air flowed out of the opening, carrying the scent of dust, old paper, and something else, the faint, metallic tang of cold metal. Kneeling, she peered into the darkness. It was a small, man-made cavity, a hidden chamber within the massive chimney structure. And inside, something was waiting. She reached in, her fingers brushing against a rough, waxy fabric. She pulled. A heavy, oilcloth-wrapped package emerged, tied with tarred rope. Behind it was a square tin box, the kind used for biscuits or deeds. It was surprisingly heavy. She set them both on the dusty floor, her hands trembling slightly. With her knife, she cut the old rope. She unfolded the oilcloth, revealing a thick, leather-bound book. It was a surveyor's logbook, its cover embossed with the faded gold letters, Silas Blackwood, C.E., Blackwood Spur Line and Terminus, 1887 to 1888. She opened it. The first page was a meticulously drawn map of the depot and the tunnel. The subsequent pages were filled with engineering calculations, geological notes, and daily entries in a neat, angular script. Her hands went to the tin box. The lid was snug, but not sealed. She pried it open. The interior gleamed with a soft, buttery light. It was filled to the very brim with gold coins, row upon row of $20 double eagles, minted in the 1880s, each one a small, heavy sun. It was a fortune, a life-changing, staggering fortune, hidden in a wall for over 100 years. For a long moment, Alara simply knelt there, staring. The gold was incomprehensible, an abstraction. It was the book that felt real. She picked it up and, sitting on the floor of her ruined, magnificent new home, she began to read the story of Silas Blackwood. His voice, preserved in iron gall ink, was one of quiet competence and burgeoning despair. He was an engineer, like her grandfather. He wrote of the beauty of the granite, the challenge of the grade, the triumph of seeing the tunnel arch completed. He wrote with love for the work. But the tone shifted. He wrote of his partner, a man named Alistair Finch, a financier from back east, who had bankrolled the project. Finch was all smiles and handshakes, but Silas's entries revealed a growing unease. Finch was cutting corners on supplies, pressuring the crews, his eyes fixed only on the rich silver claims the railroad was meant to service. Then came the entry for October 12, 1888. A minor collapse in the North Bore. Finch is using it. He has declared the tunnel a failure, a death trap. He is a liar. The timbers were sabotaged. I found the saw marks. But he has the papers, the politicians. He has accused me of negligence, of fraud. He has ruined me. The subsequent entries were a chronicle of a man being erased. Finch, citing the scandal, forced a buyout, paying Silas a pittance for his shares in the railroad and the mining claims. Silas was disgraced, his name a curse in the valley he had come to love. His final entries were written in the stationmaster's office, the very room where Alara now sat. Finch will not have this tunnel, he wrote, his script tight with fury. I have spent the last week with the best of my masons, the ones who knew the truth, and we have sealed it, not because it is unsafe, but because it is mine. He will never haul a single ounce of ore through my work. Let it be my monument and my tomb. They have begun to tell stories, a later entry read. The locals, they say the place is haunted. Every winter the frost heaves the ground near the seal, and the wind, whistling through the ventilation shafts I designed, drives fine snow in patterns across the face. They look like tracks, they say. Ghost tracks, leading into the stone. Let them. A fitting memorial for a deadline and a disgraced man. The final entry was dated November 5th, 1888. I leave tonight. I have enclosed what remains of my personal fortune, the gold I brought with me before Finch bled me dry. I seal it in the hearth, in the heart of the first and last structure I shall ever call my own. If you are reading this, it is because you have seen past the ruin. It is because you have an eye for good stone and honest work. You are a kindred spirit. The depot, the land, and the gold are yours. It is not a treasure to be spent, but a foundation on which to build. Find peace here. That is all I ask. Build a life where I could not. That will be my legacy. Tears, hot and sudden, finally fell. They were not tears of grief for her own loss, but of a profound, aching kinship with the ghost who had waited for her in the walls. She was not alone. She was the inheritor of a trust, a partner across time. Silas Blackwood had not left her a treasure. He had left her a purpose and a blessing. The gold gave her means, but it was Silas's words that gave her strength. The next day, she hiked back to Providence, her satchel heavy with a handful of coins. She walked into the town's only mercantile, a sprawling building run by a formidable woman named Maeve, whose graying hair was tied in a practical knot and whose eyes missed nothing. Alara laid a single gold coin on the counter. I need supplies, she said. Lumber, slate, glass, nails, lime, and food. A great deal of it. Maeve picked up the coin, her expression unreadable. She bit it. She weighed it in her palm. She looked at Alara, a long, appraising look. "You're the girl who bought the Blackwood Folly." It wasn't a question. "I am," Alara said. Maeve nodded slowly. "My husband is a freighter. He can haul to the end of the old service road. The last 2 miles you'll have to manage yourself." She slid the coin back across the counter. "This will cover it, and more. I'll keep a credit for you. Don't want you carrying gold around." It was a statement of trust, an acknowledgement of a shared, practical worldview. A partnership was formed, not with smiles, but with a transaction of mutual respect. The work began in earnest. Alara was no longer a survivor. She was a builder. She lived and breathed the restoration. She started with the roof of the office, stripping away the rotten slate and shattered lath. She learned the weight and balance of the long timbers as she winched them into place, replacing the rotted sections. She worked from dawn until dusk, her body aching with a satisfying exhaustion. The scent of fresh-cut pine filled the air, chasing away the smell of dust and decay. It smelled like her grandfather's workshop. It smelled like home. Her solitary labor did not go unnoticed. One afternoon, as she was meticulously reglazing the old window frames, a figure appeared at the edge of the meadow. He was an old man, lean and weathered as the mountains themselves, with a long rifle resting in the crook of his arm. He watched her for a long time. Finally, he approached. "You're putting glass in," he stated, his voice a gravelly whisper. "I am," Alara replied, not stopping her work. "Folks say this place is haunted," he said. "It's quiet enough for me," she answered, pressing a glazier's point into the sash. The old man nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Name's Jonas. I trap this territory." He gestured with his chin toward the forest. "Winter comes hard in these parts. You'll need more firewood than you think." It was the closest he could come to an offer of help, a piece of practical wisdom freely given. He became a regular visitor, never staying long, often leaving a brace of rabbits or a freshly caught trout on her doorstep without a word. He told her the stories of the valley, the real history beneath the ghost stories. He spoke of Silas Blackwood as a good man, cheated by a scoundrel. Her next ally came in the form of sound. From down the valley, she often heard the rhythmic ring of a hammer on an anvil. One day, struggling to repair the depot's old cast-iron water pump, she found a crack in the main housing. It was a repair beyond her skill with wood and stone. She loaded the heavy, broken part onto a makeshift sledge and dragged it 2 miles down the valley to the source of the sound, a smithy, dark and smelling of coal smoke and hot iron. The blacksmith was a bear of a man, with a wild beard and arms thick with muscle. His name was Cormac. He looked at the broken pump housing, then at her calloused, capable hands. "This is a brazing job. Tricky," he grunted. He watched as she pointed out the stress fracture, explaining how she thought it should be reinforced. He listened, his head cocked. "You know tools," he said. It was the highest of compliments. "The forge is cold today. Leave it. Come back in 2 days. We'll make it a trade. I need some shelves built. Good ones." She returned in 2 days to find the pump housing repaired, a seam of golden brass fused into the black iron, stronger than the original. She spent the next day at his smithy, building him a set of shelves from fine, straight-grained pine, joined with dovetails so tight they needed no nails. Cormac watched her work, nodding in silent approval. A new alliance was forged, not in conversation, but in the shared language of craft. He taught her the basics of the forge, the temper of steel, the way to read the heat in the color of the metal. In return, she repaired his leaking roof and built him a new, perfectly balanced handle for his favorite sledgehammer. The station master's office was the first to be completed. It was now a warm, dry, light-filled space. The floors were sanded and oiled, the walls newly plastered. The hearth, its secret now a part of the room's soul, drew beautifully, filling the room with the crackle of fire and the scent of burning pine. From this beachhead of order, she pushed outward, beginning the monumental task of clearing the main hall and rebuilding its roof. One crisp autumn day, a horse and rider appeared. It was Mr. Abernathy, the county clerk, out for a bit of sport hunting. He reined in his horse, his mouth falling open as he took in the scene. The new roof on the office, the glazed windows gleaming in the sun, the neat stacks of lumber, the clear sign of determined, funded progress. "Well, I'll be," he stammered, dismounting. "Looks like you struck gold, missy." He peered around, his eyes greedy and calculating. Must have found the old Blackwood treasure they always talked about. Alara was cleaning a set of recovered timbers, her face smudged with dirt. Before she could answer, a low growl came from the doorway of the office. Cormac stood there, wiping his hands on a rag. He had come up to help her hoist a ridge beam. "She found hard work," Cormac said, his voice flat and dangerous. "Something you wouldn't recognize. This is private property. Be on your way." Mr. Abernathy, faced with the blacksmith's immovable presence, flushed a deep red. He mumbled something, climbed back on his horse, and rode away, thoroughly humbled. The story of the city clerk being run off by the blacksmith spread through the valley, cementing Alara's place as one of their own. She was no longer the foolish girl who bought the folly. She was the woman at the Blackwood depot, a landmark in the local geography of respect. Winter arrived not as a gentle dusting, but as a furious assault. An early blizzard descended from the high peaks, a wall of white that buried the valley in 3 feet of snow in a single night. The wind howled, a physical force that rattled the new glass in Alara's windows, but the depot held. The office was an impregnable fortress of warmth and light against the storm's fury. On the second day of the storm, she heard a desperate shouting through the wind. Peering out, she saw a faint, struggling light. A family, caught traveling between settlements, had their wagon founder in a deep drift not half a mile away. Their axle had snapped. Without hesitation, Alara pulled on her heaviest coat, lit a bright lantern, and plunged into the storm. She found them huddled together, a man, a woman, and 2 small children, their faces numb with cold and fear. She led them back to the depot. The warmth of the stationmaster's office was a shock to their frozen bodies. The woman wept with relief as Alara wrapped the children in warm blankets and gave them hot broth. The depot, her solitary hermitage, had become a sanctuary. The next morning the storm had lessened, but not broken. The wagon's axle was thick hickory, snapped clean through. The man, whose name was Thomas, looked at it with despair. "We're stuck here until the thaw," he said. "Our supplies won't last." "No, you're not," Alara said. She looked at the axle, her mind already working. She sketched a design on a piece of slate, a pair of heavy iron splints, custom forged to brace the brake. She showed it to Cormac, who had trudged up through the snow after seeing the family's lamp from his smithy. "It'll hold," he grunted in approval, "if we can get the heat." Together, they became a force of nature themselves. They dug the broken axle out of the snow and hauled it to Cormac's smithy. For a full day, the smithy rang with the sound of their hammers. Alara worked the bellows, her arm aching, learning the rhythm of the fire. Cormac, with a craftsman's fury, forged the thick iron bars, shaping them to the complex curve of the axle. They drilled the bolt holes by hand, a grueling, sweat-soaked task. As they worked, Maeve, the freighter, arrived, her big horses plowing through the drifts. She had heard about the stranded family and had made a dangerous run with a wagon full of flour, salt pork, and blankets. Alara paid for it all with another of Silas's coins, turning the dead man's gold into life and sustenance. They fitted the iron splints to the axle, bolting them tight. It was a brutal, beautiful piece of engineering, a testament to practical skill and shared will. They hauled it back and, working in the freezing cold, reattached it to the wagon. When Thomas and his family were ready to leave 2 days later, the sun shining on a transformed world of white, he tried to pay her. Elara shook her head. "Pay it forward," she said. "Silas would have liked that." The act cemented her place. She was no longer just respected. She was a pillar. The depot was no longer a folly. It was the heart of a small, resilient community, forged not by proximity, but by competence and mutual aid. With the coming of spring, she turned to the final piece of Silas's legacy. His logbook had mentioned his partner, Alistair Finch, and a great-grandson who, according to Jonas's inquiries, was now running a small, struggling shipping concern back east, burdened by the bad luck and ill repute that seemed to follow the Finch name. Silas's request had been clear. "If my name is ever cleared in that valley, see that a portion of what was taken is returned, not as charity, but as the settling of a debt across generations." Through Maeve's mercantile connections, Elara arranged for an anonymous transfer of funds to the Finch Company, a sum large enough to clear its debts and secure its future. She included a short, unsigned note. "A debt from the Blackwood Spur Line is now paid in full." The circle was closed. Silas Blackwood's honor was restored, not in a courtroom, but in an act of quiet, profound justice. Another year passed. Winter came again, this time gently. The depot was whole. The main hall's roof was complete, its vast interior now a workshop filled with the tools of her trade and Cormac's. Light streamed through the tall, arched windows she had so painstakingly rebuilt. It was not just a house, it was a cathedral of work. One evening, as the snow fell in thick, silent flakes, Elara stood by the sealed entrance to the Blackwood Tunnel, a lantern in her hand. Cormac, Jonas, and Maeve were inside the depot, their laughter a warm, living sound that carried on the cold air. She was not waiting for a ghost. She was observing a memory. Just as Silas had described, the wind and the frost had conspired to create faint, shallow depressions in the fresh snow, patterns that looked uncannily like tracks, leading from the forest and disappearing into the cold, silent stone of the seal. She smiled. The ghost tracks were not a curse. They were a signpost. They were the riddle that had led her here. They were a monument to the man who had left her an inheritance of purpose. Inside, on the great stone mantel of the hearth that had held the secret for so long, two objects sat side by side. One was her grandfather's brass transit compass, its needle pointing steadfastly north, a symbol of the truth and skill he had given her. Next to it sat a small, intricately carved wooden bird, whittled from a piece of pine, its details impossibly fine. She had found it in the tin box with the gold, a final, personal token from Silas Blackwood. The two objects, one from the man who raised her and one from the man who saved her, represented the two halves of her soul, the merging of her inheritances. She looked from the tracks to the warm, glowing windows of her home, a beacon in the vast, quiet wilderness. She had come here with nothing but a handful of tools and a legacy of skill. The world had seen a ruin, but her grandfather had taught her to see the bones, and Silas had trusted her to see the soul. The gold had been a tool, nothing more. The real fortune was in the strength of her own two hands, in the quiet confidence of a well-made joint, a true wall, a warm roof. The $450 she had given to a laughing clerk for a pile of worthless rocks was, without a shadow of a doubt, the best money she had ever spent.